Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Hannah Murphy, and I am an event specialist for the Whole U. As always, this session is being recorded and will be sent out in 2 weeks. The slides will also be sent out after the session. There will be time for questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to drop them in the chat. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Anne Marie Gloster. Dr. Gloster is an educator and expert in nutrition, food science, and sustainable food systems. She is an epidemiology faculty at UW and teaches courses in nutrition and health with special focus on culinary, nutrition science, and hands-on food education. So thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
Great. I am thrilled to be here today. I'm going to share my screen with my slides. Great. And now I have to move my little box around. Okay, make sure it's in the right place. All right. So today, I have a seminar coming up that's called Let Us Talk Savings in the Kitchen. And so when Hannah approached me about doing something for National Nutrition Month, today is actually National Dietitian Day. So for all of you that may be out there that are dietitians, congratulations and enjoy your day. I am also a registered dietitian for over 3 decades. And as Hannah was saying, I am a professor in the School of Public Health in the Food Systems, Nutrition, and Health program. And my home department is epidemiology, but I don't do any epidemiology. So it's kind of confusing. But I have been teaching culinary nutrition science for over 2 decades. And that is a blend of culinary arts, nutrition, and food science, and kind of really looking at the intersection of how when you understand the chemistry and the physics behind ingredients, then every time you use them in the kitchen, they are a little bit more predictable. And so I love teaching that, and it's just always been my goal to teach functional kitchen habits, and I'm constantly looking at ways to save time and money. And my dad is actually, I'm dedicating this talk to him because he is truly one of the most frugal people I've ever met. And he has taught me a lot about cost benefit analysis and applying it towards most of my consumer decisions. So, as I said, this is the course that I'm going to be doing in the spring. And if you've never taken a class at UW as faculty and staff, I know that we're able to enroll in classes. I'm really happy to have any community members in there and to join in with the class. I think that the more life experiences you have really will help contribute to this topic. Um, but I'm really basing it around this idea of crowdsourcing. And so we really are going to be getting input from you all today and from others because I don't want to just sit here and tell you what, cost control, cost saving kind of habits are in a nutshell. I want to kind of give you a chance to share with what your knowledge is as well. But I also want to really deploy the talk today by looking at a historical perspective on the history of home economics and nutrition, which are both a little over 130 years old. So we really want to address that the fact that home economics and nutrition has always focused on thrift and looks at food insecurity and helping people that are on limited budgets saving money, and so we really want to also offer alternatives to dining out. Hannah and I were just talking about how expensive it is to eat out in Seattle, and so without I'm kind of like talking through some of these early slides. They're there for you to have more context when you go back. But right now, I want to kind of look at the historical context. And so we start here with Ellen Swallow Richards and thinking all the way back to 1899. She got together. Ellen was literally the first woman to ever obtain a degree in chemistry, and she was the first female graduate from MIT. And she was the first person to really apply the science of chemistry in nutrition. So she's almost one of the founding mothers of the field of nutrition as well. Um, she applied all of her scientific knowledge, though, to really understanding how household management could benefit from science. And so she also was looking at health and economics and landed on the term home economics. And she had this series of conferences from 1899 to 1908 that were called the Lake Placid Conferences. And this is where the idea of home economics as a discipline was really established. And so by 1908, we had the American Home Economics Association. But I want to give you a little scandalous note, because that's what I love about history is being able to tell really fun stories. So 10 people were in attendance at these conferences to establish home economics originally. And one of them, the only male, was Melville Dewey and his wife Annie. She was considered one of the early home economists, and he was one of the founding members of the American Library Association, and was responsible for the Dewey Decimal System. And they wanted him at the conference because one of the things that they really wanted to push for was the fact that the home economic books that would end up in, for with students and for the lay public to read, they really wanted it to be classified in social sciences as the number, and they didn't want to end up in the arts and craft or arts and recreation section. And so they were really kind of asking Melville to make sure that they ended up in the 339 designation, which was actually covered the topic pauperism, or meaning to exist in a state of poverty. And now the 339 designation is actually where macroeconomics is housed. But eventually they stayed out of arts and recreation and needlepoint area, and they ended up landing in the technology category. So home economics texts are now under the number 640. But the scandalous piece of this is that Melville was actually eventually run out of the American Library Association because he was a sexual harasser, and he would routinely harass so many of the librarians and the library staff level that they kicked him out. And the Deweys together, they owned this resort at Lake Placid. And it was what you would consider a clean living resort today. They were good friends with the Kellogg's, who started the Kellogg Cereal Company and also had a wellness retreat. But they were also huge racists, and they absolutely denied anybody from going to their resort that was African American or Jewish. So it was an interesting history in the back end of things. But along with the establishment of the Home Economics Association, then the American Dietetic Association was established by Lena Cooper in 1917. And it was really to have kind of a parallel or a more focused look at human nutrition and dietetics. And Lena Cooper's role, she was on a mission to improve Americans' addiction to meats, wheats, and sweets. So meat, carbohydrates, and candy. Does that sound familiar? Have we moved very far from 1917? I think we still have meats, wheats, and sweets issues. But her work caught the eye of President Hoover, and eventually, excuse me, dietetic positions were in the government as part of the U.S. Food Administration. And it also, this kind of work was put in place through the Smith-Lever Act. And that is what established cooperative extension programs in the land grant universities. And that is truly where a lot of our home economics still happen. And So universities started employing home economists. The rural areas were starting to see an influx of home economists through the ag extension kind of process. And, it's so funny because a lot of their early work in the establishment of home economics was all about helping rural women save labor and time and energy. And there's actually was a pamphlet put out called Saving Steps. And that's in contrast today. We're all trying to get our 10,000 steps, and yet they were trying to really look at how to save women from extra labor. So time has gone on. But the where home economics really showed itself to be so valuable came about in the 1930s with the Great Depression. And this is when Eleanor Roosevelt, the first lady, really embraced some of the early home economists that were in universities, and she cut the budget for staff and the dining menus at the White House by 25%. And she was serving these fortified milk supplements at every meal that were milk plus corn or milk plus wheat or milk plus oats. And it doesn't sound all that delicious, but they did it. And one of the other benefits of the home economics movement during the Depression was the establishment of the free lunch program. And this ended up feeding 6 million undernourished children during the Depression. And it created 64,000 jobs in our school systems. And so that really made a big difference. The USDA had a Bureau of Home Economics, and that was Louise Stanley's purview. And she developed the economy food plans, and they really were menus that helped families get through these lean times. And they really focused on what people could grow at home. But they were also creating really cool recipes that used inexpensive ingredients, mainly looking at things like root vegetables and beans and some of the things that we think about still today as ways to save money. But they also created recipes like depression cake that didn't use any eggs, milk, or butter. They had mock apple pie. They figured out how to extend meat by adding oatmeal and other kind of rice as fillers. And so they really were very creative in ways to help people try to get through these tough economic times. And then following that, we went straight into World War II, and there was a military draft to get soldiers in. But it turned out that a third of the young men that were called up for service actually were undernourished. We have a similar problem nowadays with recruits being overnourished. But right back there in 1940, coming right out of the Great Depression, we had a lot of undernourishment. And so the slogan, "Food will win the war," was something that President Roosevelt said a lot. And that they also used the term "food fights for freedom." And this campaign came about because of the home economists. And before we had what many of you may recall as the four food groups, we actually had seven food groups. And they included potatoes, grains and breads, dairy, proteins, so all kinds of meats. Butter and margarine had its own group. And the funny thing about the margarine was actually invented by France back in the late 1800s, but it really became something where when we had rationing, people turned to margarine as a substitute. But originally, it was so bad and bad tasting that they called it embalmed butter. And I just always found that term really gross. But in addition, the other groups were vegetables. And then tomato and citrus was combined together to make the seventh food group that they came up with. And these were supposed to, ensure that people had enough nutrition. But it also kind of moved into this idea that we establish recommended daily allowances or dietary allowances, the RDAs. And all of the school lunch menus were actually rewritten to make sure that if any child was in school, that a third of their RDAs could be met by that one meal. And that is something that still continues today. But they also, home economists led the Victory Garden uh, effort, and they convinced Americans to grow victory gardens, and they accounted for 40% of the vegetable consumption across the nation during the war years. And so that was really, really important. And again, like the Depression, they also were working on developing wartime recipes. So they were made with the things that your ration coupons could cover, and really eliminated expensive items. But they also had to develop recipes to utilize the new glass and ceramic, think Pyrex or Corningware kind of cookware that was coming out, because all of the metal cookware that people had in their homes was being donated to the war effort to make munitions and military vehicles. So they really had a valuable role in helping us move forward. But after the war, the home economics continued and thrived as a career for women and as a benefit to the American public. There was really this shift in the home economics education, though, from scarcity management to thinking about how to promote consumer goods and how to craft a career. Home economics was really, they had their heyday, and then they were able to establish these really great careers, but they still never ever went away from really thinking about thrift and efficiency. But they also were working with other kinds of food product companies. Um, Again, as the technology innovations in the kitchen kept occurring rapidly, people were being introduced to more ready to eat. Think TV dinners, think boil and bag type foods, being having Tupperware, which could end up extending shelf life by having better packaging to put things leftovers away with. Dishwashers were coming about this time. But these home economists that were working for businesses, they actually were paid for by these food companies, but also the utility companies. And the one of them during the 30s and the 40s, the age of radio, there were all sorts of radio talk shows about cooking and home economy and all the different things that housewives that were at home could listen to while they did their homework. And these homemakers were really glamorous on the radio, and eventually when television took over, they ended up going into the creating what we now know as the Food Network. And we also have visual things like Instagram and TikTok, where people are continuing to learn about home economics and nutrition and recipes and cooking. But these ladies in the 50s and the 60s really were the food influencers of their day. And so Betty Crocker is who I have pictured here on the slide. And these are the different iterations. And I can imagine now, these were all painted portraits, but probably we'll use AI to figure out what Betty Crocker needs to look like in this day and age. But other than Betty Crocker, there's another Betty that you may not have ever heard of, and her name was Betty Newton. And Betty Crocker had a radio show, and she was sponsored by the Gold Medal Flour Company. But Betty Newton worked for the Columbia Gas Company, and these women actually they all took the name of Betty Newton. They were all incredibly stylishly dressed and would go into people's homes because the appliances you had in your kitchen were often sold by the utility companies. So the gas company would then send out these home economists who would come into your home and teach you how to use your new appliances, and they would introduce new food items and technology of all kinds. And they made 1 million home visits a year. But they were also acting as corporate spies. So they were the ones that were able to come back to the company and leverage what these insights they were learning from the women in their homes. And they really made a difference. They also, during this time, home economists were working on all the educational materials for the high school and the college curriculums that were based in home economics. And they worked with the ag extension programs ongoing. And actually, one of my jobs before I came here to UW was working in ag extension with a program called FNEP, which stands for the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program. And, we taught budgeting, nutrition, and meal planning in through classes that usually people came to us. We weren't going out into people's homes anymore. But they also this cadre of home economists was writing great recipes be a gas company, and they acted as corporate spies because they would go into the homes, train women how to use this equipment, and basically how to use the new foods that were being introduced through technology. And they made 1 million visits to women's homes to try to do this work. And they taught thrift and economy and efficiency, and they literally listened to what these women said and then took that information back to their companies so that they could end up promoting kind of the offerings of these companies. And their home economists were also still working in ag extension and coming up with all sorts of different educational materials. And so there's just kind of a brief view of where I left off with that. And then I wanted to move into this idea that the next phase was the 1970s. So after the war, the men came home. Women who had jobs, wartime jobs, ended up going back into the home, and we had the baby booms of the 50s and the 60s. But then by the 70s, women were starting to move back into the workforce again. And so we started to see a decline in home economics education. And there was less focus on that and more on degrees that women could get that would enhance and expand on their job aspirations, career aspirations outside of home economics. And so in the 1980s, actually, our UW lost its nutrition and home economics majors during the early 80s. And it was decided that because WSU, as the land grant college in Washington, they had home economics and they kept it. But if any of you are out looking at the cherry trees in the next couple of weeks on the quad, Rate Hall is the home, was the building where home economics was. And if you look at the gargoyles at the top of the building, you'll see how they reflect all of the different kinds of majors that we find in the home economics world. But we had a real image problem in the 80s with, I was in home economics studying nutrition in the 80s, and we were called Becky Home Eckies. And we were seen as dowdy and frumpy and we too serious, and we had an image problem. So they took home economics and the field rebranded itself as family and consumer sciences or other kind of iterations on that. And they included many more new majors, including things like social work, child development, fashion or apparel sciences. So again, adding in more science based instead of thinking about it as being a skill based kind of education. And so human nutrition and dietetics was also, being promoted as one of those areas. But the human nutrition and dietetics focus really started to look more towards the registered dietitians and getting out of the kitchen and having more to do with clinical approaches to dietetics. They wanted to be seen as sciency. And I remember becoming a dietitian at that, in the late 80s, early 90s, and we would wear lab coats when we worked in the hospital and the nursing home. We wanted to be seen as scientists, and there was a big push to get us out of the kitchen as much as possible. So it we went through a lot of changes, but during the 80s and 90s, the American Dietetic Association actually got into bed with, kind of scandalously, with big food and beverage companies like McDonald's and Mars and Coca-Cola and the National Confectioners Association, think candy, the National Grocery Manufacturers Association, so think ultra processed foods. And so we got kind of called on the carpet for that, because those companies are all about profit and not necessarily, you don't think about Coca-Cola and think about improving human health. So just shy of the 100-year anniversary of the birth of dietetics, the ADA went through a rebranding itself, and it's now the AND, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And I think it's kind of funny. The ADA, American Dietetic Association, was always kind of difficult because there was the American Diabetes Association and the American Dental Association and a lot of other, the American Disabilities Act. So, we had a lot of reasons why it was good to kind of change it. But thinking about where we are now, um, we basically have gone through the 2008 recession and the COVID-19 pandemic. And both of those, not necessarily with the term home economics, but there was a focus on the home and there was a focus on what we could do at home. And you guys remember all of the sourdough bread making because yeast was suddenly unavailable, and cooking bread at home is was seen as caring. The canning came back. People got backyard chickens again, which again, right now I have this sign up about the things going on with the bird flu and egg sales, and eggs are over $12 a dozen near me, and it is, so this interest in looking at higher inflation rates and the political shifts that are happening, we really need to start thinking more about possibly saving money. And I do know that, I was a little anxious before the new administration came in, and when I was hearing about tariffs on Canada, I definitely went out and bought a gallon of Canadian maple syrup because I am definitely, I don't like the fake stuff. So I have that kind of in my savings corner, which my family calls my apocalypse corner because they mock me for hoarding maple syrup. Um, but we are seeing a whole lot more in innovation around savings and food preservation and being able to do things at home, and really looking at why we would want to not only save money but look at our health. And so the fermentation movement is being driven by people concerned with gut health and the gut brain connection. And all the research coming out about ultra processed foods is really pushing consumers toward making more scratch made food, which is actually usually healthier for us. So, um, this class that I'm going to teach is really going to focus on how we can share these different methods of, food saving and bringing back the wisdom from days of old, and then applying our modern technology and new ways of doing things. So the way I teach, as I said, I really emphasize skill building and learning how to do things for yourself that you may have thought only could be purchased. And I love building community. And one thing that we've really seen through the pandemic was that separation and hunkering down and loss of a lot of shared community spaces. And that's why thinking about what those rural home economists did during the Great Depression, one of the things they did is they actually went out into rural communities and they would bring the equipment in for canning and that many people couldn't afford, or they sold, and they would provide the equipment, and rural women would come together with the all the produce that they were growing, and they would process it all together, and they had these canning clubs that really gave women a sense of connection and saved them money and brought everything back. And I think those are the kind of community ideas that are going to help us all get through tough economic times together. So, what I've done is created this class that it's going to be very project based. And I have 41 different projects that I'm going to throw out there, and I want to see whether or not people can, what they want to grasp onto and what they don't. So I've kind of put them in these different categories of smart shopping strategies, food preservation, budget friendly, community based approaches, technology, homesteading, and historical and educational research. And the goal is to create a project idea and then research it and then create a deliverable, a professional level deliverable that's going to be anything from handouts, infographics, a video, maybe a cooking video, maybe a tour through the grocery store to help people manage how to grocery shop more effectively. The students will be hooking up with the UW Pantry to show and create some handouts about how easy it is to find food pantries and then get in and then understand what may be available and then what you can do with those things. We're going to be teaming up with the UW Farm, UW Dining. I want students are going to be working on a project, which I was talking to Hannah about earlier, where they're going to, and I hate this term, cheap eats, but they're going to be looking at where people can dine out in Seattle to basically have a little bit more savings, but still be able to go out and enjoy yourselves. We've got to have some of that fun. So I'm hoping that we may get students that end up on my buddy Ton Vin's Seattle Eats podcast or write articles for Seattle Times. But we're also going to be developing a website called letustalksavings.com. And we're going to have all of these materials are going to be housed there in the website, and they're going to be available to all of you and people out in the general population in general. So if we're really looking forward to doing that, and we'll have a companion YouTube channel to go along with it. But um, you know, I am trying to see where I am on my notes. So this is what I want to do now. One of the other things, like if you want to, I wanted to give you an example of a project. And so I started this last weekend, and for 1 second, I'm gonna stop sharing my slides here for a second because I want to show you this. This looks like a bag of dog food with a white moldy spot in it. It's not. It's going to be blue oyster mushrooms. And so over this past weekend, I put together, I think, 9 oyster mushroom bags. And basically, it is recycled newspaper cat litter because that's been pasteurized and so it's safe, and then mushroom spawn and rabbit food. And you moisten all of this and then you put it in a cheap plastic bag and put it in the dark for 2 weeks, and then take it out and put it in room light for a week. And then in another week after that, mushrooms are going to grow out of the holes of the bag. And so um, this project is cost about $3 per bag, but it's going to deliver about $20 worth of mushrooms. And so I'm going to actually bring this setup into the very first class we're going to have, and I'm going to show students how easy it is to create a community-based approach, and they could actually sell these to their friends for $5, recoup their money that they put into the project, and then gain $2 profit maybe on each bag. But they basically, there's so many ways we can come together as a community and create foods that then we can have a business around. I had a quote in there earlier that, my whole philosophy on this is like, if you teach a man to fish, I mean, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. But my modern take on that is, show somebody how to create sourdough starter and watch them build a business empire. So I like taking things to that broader level. But what I want to do now is we're going to put you in breakout rooms, and I want, number one, there's going to be 2 or 3 people in your room, and I want us to create some shared savings ideas. So I want to know from you all, and we might not have time. We might cut because I had that 3-minute interruption, which I apologize. I don't know how that happened, but we had a couple icebreaker questions. You can do those or not. But really, what I want to look at is this historical idea. I want to know a cost saving strategy that you learned from your parents or your grandparents that you grew up with, and particularly strategies that would still be applicable today, but they're things that you learned growing up. And then I want you to share a current money saving strategy that you have at the grocery store or in the kitchen. And we have a Google Doc that Hannah's going to put in the chat. And then when you get into your breakout rooms, we'll give you access to it again if you don't have it. And I want you to just give us those 2 ideas from everybody. And if this is too much, like, don't get me wrong, Hannah already I had to fix my Google Doc like 3 times. If you have problems with the Google Doc in any way, feel free that when we get back to the big room, you can put your ideas in the chat and we'll capture that. And we're going to create a document that's going to live. We'll send it out to you early, but it's going to live on that letustalksavings.com website that we end up get it up and running. And we're going to continue to add to it, and we'll organize it and that kind of thing. So that's what we want to ask you to do for the next 15 minutes. Yeah, that's going to be good time. So, Hannah, do you need to interrupt here? So, I hope you can join us again at the end of May, early June, when we do our final presentations. I hope you'll end up seeing the website later. And we're going to continue to look at this focus. I think this is a really important thing that we're going to need to pay attention to a lot as we hear more and more talk about inflation, the impact of the bird flu on the egg prices, and what the knock-on effects of all of that are. I know that people going out to eat are spending more on eggs. I think Waffle House, I'm from the Southeast, and they have a 50-cent premium on egg dishes, and so we're all going to learn together. And this was a great first start. So if you know a dietitian, give them a big high five today, or a fist bump, or whatever you do.
Thank you so much for joining us today and hosting this session. It was super awesome. And
Yeah.
thank you everyone for joining and sharing your ideas.
Yeah. Welcome to my kitchen. Okay, thanks.
All right, have a great day, everyone.
Yeah. And Hannah, I don't know whether I need to stay on with you or not, or
Oh, no, you're good to go. I'm just going to make
okay.
sure the chat is saved before I log
Okay.
off.
Yes. All right, great.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
Of course.